Now, what are postmodern views about the nature of language? And this sort of ties back into how postmodernism can extend into linguistics and cryptography a bit. And I find these views really interesting because they really make you consider language in a whole new way, which is very vastly different to other philosophers in the past about language. And so, if you're a postmodernist and you're interested in language, then you're also a post-structuralist. And postmodernism really just began with post-structuralism as a linguistic theory and then extended into something else. So into the other branches we talked about earlier, like sociology, philosophy, economics, etc. And to understand post-structuralism, we should first consider structuralism. And structuralism was a school of thought founded by Ferdinand de Saussure, and it's a very traditional way of looking at linguistics. And they believe that the meaning of something in language is not known through its definition, but through the context in which it's surrounded by and a person's exposure to those different contexts. And if you think about it, it makes sense because let's say, for example, you are wanting to learn a completely new language that you've never seen before, and you open a dictionary about that language, but then you're not going to understand that language at all from just reading the dictionary because each word would have to be defined through other words, and then these other words would then have to be defined by other words, and then by other words, and then by other words. So really, you can't start understanding the language from some fundamental structure going from the ground up, but you just have to jump around from different spaces to try and understand the language. And this is very unique to the structuralist Saussure, who founded the school of structuralism, but they think the signifier signified distinction is arbitrary. So basically, what word signifies what object in the world is arbitrary. And so the word itself is unimportant, yet how the word signifies something else is. So let's say you take a tree, but then I call it something else, I'll just call it a bird. Then whether I call a tree or a tree a bird is irrelevant because you can still have the same sort of understanding. So they think the signifier signified distinction is completely arbitrary. And the way we modify language to suit the objects in the real world is something that's completely by chance. And this opposes some of the traditional views about language, such as Rousseau's theory, which says that language began in love. So language doesn't really begin in love, it's just a sort of process that is used to understand the world, but then the way this works is completely arbitrary and random. And post-structuralists then developed this structuralist idea further by arguing that all meaning would be relative and open to interpretation. So the context that a word is in doesn't affect the meaning of the word either, and only the subject which knows the word does. So basically, everything is relative, everything is subjective, meaning is completely reliant upon the subject. And I guess you could also link this to how, at the time, Einstein's general theory of relativity was gaining popularity. So the idea of everything being dependent or relative to the subject was gaining some traction. And therefore, language would be a system that relies completely on the user of the language. And so a truth and meaning that is not subjective or not detached from the subject would be impossible.